Now that we have the carburetors tied back out of the way, we're going to go ahead with the install of the new billet head. The easiest way to do the drainage of the engine is to drain down the bottom. Typically with just a head change, you don't need to drain down the entire engine, just enough to get the liquid below the level of the head and the top of the cylinders. Rather than remove the hose off the top fitting, it's a lot easier just to unbolt the fitting and leave it installed into the sled. The installation we're doing right now is for an 800 and it is the same for a 600. It requires 11mm socket for the head bolts, and we crack them all loose going around the head. Once all the bolts are loosened and backed off, remove the bolts and slowly lift on the head just to break the seal on the O-rings. There is some water and fluid left into the head even after you've drained the bottle down, so it's pretty much a necessity to leave the head as flat as possible when you remove it. The next thing to do now is to remove the front hose. And the next thing to do is to make sure that the temperature sensor is unplugged from its stock position. Now the head's ready to remove. Let me see what I mean by there's antifreeze in the head. Looking at the pistons before the reinstallation of the head, just to see how the snowmobile has been running, and by the looks of the wash on this piston, it's pretty closely jetted. It has around 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch of wash on it, and that's generally a pretty good setting for the motors. At the same time, while you have the head off, it's always good to do a visual inspection of the cylinders. Roll the piston down to bottom dead center, and with your finger you can feel around to see if there's any nicks or scoring in the cylinder walls. These cylinders here appear to be in perfect shape. Now the next thing in the progression of this is to remove all the component parts off of the stock head. First thing that we do is remove the temperature sender for the MPEM, clean the threads, and then reinstall it in the new head. And if you're careful removing the top gasket here, you can reuse it on the new head that you're going to install. The next removal is the heated carb nipple, 7/16 socket and a ratchet. Removes it very easily. The next thing to remove is the bottom hose fitting and the thermostat that's in the stock head. It's best at this time too, because the oxidization on the rubber gasket of the thermostat, is to clean that off as well. At the same time, note to see if there's any bending in the stem of the solder pot where it opens and closes. This one's in great shape. We'll just clean it up and reuse it again. So once you receive your new head, just remove it from the package, and you'll see that there's a sheet of paper in the packaging which explains the generalities of the installation of the head, whether you have a PowerTech engine with an aux sensor or one without an aux sensor. As you can see, the interior of this head has a greater volume than the stock head does because of the take-up. The cooling in the stock head enters through the thermostat housing and just circulates around the exterior of the dome. It doesn't have any flotation or fluid around the very physical top part of the dome. Where with our head, the dome design and the clearance inside of the head, it gives you about 50% more cooling volume than a stock head does. The benefit of the cooling, it helps to stop heat soak and also allows the engine to run 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit cooler at any given time. When you receive the head from us, the domes are already installed. They're just pressed in, the O-ring holds them in place. If you ever need to remove the dome, all you do is thread an old spark plug into the hole, hold it up off the bench in your hand, and tap the spark plug will remove the dome from the billet part. And you have it apart. After having cleaned the original temperature sensor probe, we use plumber's thread tape just to seal the threads for the installation of the sending unit. The same with the heated carb nipple. Once you've cleaned it, is to install the plumber's thread tape and then reinstall it back into the head. Then the last thing you're going to do on the bench is reinstall the thermostat and set the hose fitting in place. Now we're ready to reinstall the head on top of the cylinders. The first thing to do is to slide it in on top of the cylinders and install this lower hose. Now that the bottom hose is fastened in place, it's time to adjust the head to sit correctly on the cylinders and install the cylinder bolts, the head bolts, finger threaded. The main reason for not fastening the top water neck jacket is so you have access to this rear bolt to install it and to torque it down before you install the top water neck. Now that we have the head in place and the cylinder bolts are threaded in hand tight, we'll now torque the cylinder head bolts down. The final setting for torque on the cylinder head bolts is 21 foot-pounds. Our initial install and go around will be 12 foot-pounds. The correct pattern for torquing the bolts is to start in the inside and work your way out with a crisscross pattern. The reason you do the first torque pattern at 12 foot-pounds is to evenly pull the head down. If you started out at the maximum, you'll be pulling it really tight in the center and it's still not tight on the outside. So you do it in the sequences of separate lesser amount of torques to the final torque. Now we're going to do the 21 foot-pounds of torque on the cylinder head. Once that's completed, we'll go back around the head, back all the bolts off, and then retorque the cylinder bolts down again. What that does is it sets the billet part of the aluminum dome into the billet part of the head. The sequence again is the same. You start at 11 foot-pounds or 12 foot-pounds for the first go around of torque, and then finish the torque of the bolts off at 21 foot-pounds. Now that it's done the second time, the head is good to go. Now that the cylinder head is torqued into place, use the existing gasket that you have from the stock head to replace the top water manifold. Now the installation of the billet head complete. Before installing the carburetors, you need to reconnect the temperature sending unit so that all your components will work properly once finished. Next thing to reinstall is a set of spark plugs. As always with installing a set of spark plugs, you should tighten them down fully one time, then back the spark plugs off loose and retighten them again. What that does is sets the gasket on the bottom of the spark plug to a correct collapse, and you won't have any issues with the spark plug coming loose after. Before we install the carburetors, we give a little squirt of WD-40 on the top of the carburetor. It just creates a slippery surface for the carburetor to be installed into the boot, and they snap right in place. After a period of time, the WD-40 will dissipate and you'll have no problem with it whatsoever. Once the carburetor is in place, the heated carb hose should be slid back onto the fitting and the clamp put back in place. Next thing we're going to do is reinstall the air box. And the same thing for them, is just a little squirt of WD-40 on the throat of the carburetors. And as you slide the air box back in, that's the time to re-plug the temperature sensor back into the box. Okay, last step in the finalization of the installation of the head is to reinstall antifreeze and fill it to the cold level on the bottle. You start the motor and let it run and come up to operating temperature. Let it cool back to ambient temperature, check the fluid level, and install more coolant if it's necessary. Other than that, put the rad cap back on and you're good to go. The final thing we're going to do here in this installation is reinstall the clutches, and the snowmobile will be complete. Install the primary clutch now, and we'll tighten the bolt physically by hand, and we'll finish it off with torque. Torque of the clutch bolt is 70 foot-pounds. The cranking compression of the motor now will be changed because of the installation of the billet head by 5 or 6 pounds of cranking pressure. Also, the compression ratio has changed from approximately 12 to 1 to 13 to 1, which is the creation of more power. Okay, now that the panels are installed on the snowmobile, the job's complete, you're ready to go.